I didn't say a word. I just stood there, holding that envelope, while 50 people stared at me like I was something that had crawled in off the street. My uncle's voice was still ringing in my ears. She's only here because she wants something. She's always wanted something. She's always wanted something. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just smiled, set the envelope on the table, and waited. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning, because none of this makes sense without the beginning. My grandmother was the kind of woman who ironed her pillowcases. She had a specific way of folding napkins, a specific mug she used every single morning, and a specific chair in the living room that nobody else was allowed to sit in. Not because she was mean about it. Just because that was her chair, and everybody knew it, and that was that. Her name was June, and she raised me from the time I was 9 years old after my mom passed. She never made a big deal out of it. That was her way. She just quietly moved my clothes into the small bedroom at the end of the hall, put a new set of towels in the bathroom, and said, "Dinner's at 6. Don't be late." That was it. No long conversation about feelings. No dramatic moment. She just made space for me like it was the most natural thing in the world. My name is Aubrey. I'm 31 now. Back then I was a skinny, terrified 9-year-old who didn't know what to do with her hands. Grandma June had 2 other children besides my mother, my uncle Gerald and my aunt Sylvie. They both had families of their own. Gerald lived 40 minutes away with his wife and their son, my cousin Preston, who was 6 years older than me, and treated me the way a cat treats a dog it didn't ask for. Sylvie lived closer, maybe 20 minutes, and she was warmer than Gerald, but she had 3 kids of her own and a husband who worked nights, and she was always exhausted. She tried. I'll give her that. She tried. But Grandma June was my person. She was the one who came to every school play, every parent-teacher conference, every awkward middle school graduation where I tripped going up the stairs, and she pretended not to notice, and then made me laugh about it on the way home. She was the one who taught me to drive in the parking lot of a shuttered Kmart and screamed when I almost clipped a shopping cart and then laughed until she cried. I lived with her until I was 18 and left for college on a partial scholarship. She cried when she dropped me off. She pretended she wasn't crying, but I saw it. I hugged her for a long time in the parking lot of my dorm and she said, "You're going to be fine. You've always been fine." I called her every Sunday, without fail. For 11 years, I called her every Sunday morning at 9 o'clock, and she picked up every single time. The house was the thing. It had always been the thing. Even when nobody said it out loud. Grandma June's house was a 4-bedroom colonial in a suburb of Columbus that had appreciated considerably since she and my grandfather bought it in 1978. By the time I was grown, it was worth somewhere around $380,000. Not a mansion, but a real house, on a real street, with a yard and a finished basement and a kitchen that smelled like coffee and whatever she was baking. Gerald had always assumed he would get it. He never said this directly to me, but he said it in other ways. The way he talked about eventually doing renovations. The way he referred to the spare bedroom as the room I'll use for my office. The way he looked at that house like it already belonged to him, and we were all just guests. Sylvie didn't say much about it. But she didn't push back on Gerald either, which I think amounted to the same thing. I never thought about it. I know that sounds naive, but I genuinely didn't. That was my grandmother's house. It felt wrong to think about it in terms of what would happen when she was gone, so I just didn't. The summer I turned 28, Grandma June had a small stroke. She recovered well. Her speech came back fully. Her mobility was fine. But it scared all of us. It scared me so much I drove up from Cincinnati, where I was living at the time, and stayed for 2 weeks. I cooked for her and drove her to her follow-up appointments, and sat with her in the evenings while she watched her shows. Gerald visited twice during those 2 weeks. Sylvie came 3 times. I'm not saying that to be petty. I'm saying it because it matters later. After I went back home, Grandma June called me on a Tuesday, not our usual Sunday, and said she needed to tell me something. "I've updated my will," she said. "I want you to know before anyone else does. I'm leaving you the house." I went very quiet. Gran, I said. You don't have to do that. I know I don't have to, she said, in that voice she used when she thought someone was being thick. I want to. Gerald has his own house. Sylvie has her own house. You've been renting for 10 years and you're throwing money away every month, and I know your salary and I know your student loans, and I want you to have a foundation. That's what your grandfather would have wanted. I cried on the phone. She pretended not to notice. Same as the stairs at graduation. She made me promise not to tell anyone. She said she'd told her attorney, a woman named Beverly who had handled her affairs for years, and that was enough. She didn't want family drama. She said, when I'm gone, Beverly will handle it. Until then, let's just have our Sundays. So that's what we did. Grandma June passed in February of last year. Quietly, in her sleep, the way she would have wanted, she was 81. She'd had a good run, as she would have said herself. I drove up for the funeral and stayed for a week to help sort through things. Gerald was already talking about the house within 48 hours of her death. Not to me directly, but I could hear him on the phone with Sylvie in the kitchen while I was folding laundry in the next room. We should get someone in to appraise it, he said. I've already got a guy. We could list it by spring if we move fast. I kept folding laundry. I didn't say anything. I thought of Grandma June telling me to let Beverly handle it, and I held on to that. Beverly contacted us all about 3 weeks after the funeral. She was professional and efficient, and she read the will in her office with Gerald and Sylvie and me all sitting across from her in a row. Gerald had brought his wife Marlene. Marlene had strong opinions about upholstery. When Beverly got to the part about the house, Gerald's face did something I'd never seen a human face do before. It went very, very still, and then it went red, starting at the collar and moving upward. That's not right, he said, before Beverly had even finished the sentence. I assure you it is, Beverly said. She had the energy of a woman who had seen this exact scene many times before and was not impressed by it. She would never have. Aubrey couldn't have. He looked at me then, and the look on his face was something I don't really want to describe. Did you pressure her? When you were up here after her stroke, did you? Gerald, Sylvie said quietly. She was vulnerable and Aubrey was here for 2 weeks and suddenly she changes her will. She changed her will because she wanted to, Beverly said, still with that same flat calm. I can confirm that she was of sound mind and there was no undue pressure of any kind. If you'd like to contest it, you're welcome to speak with your own attorney, but I'd advise you to review Ohio's estate law before you spend money on that. Gerald left without saying goodbye to me. Sylvie stayed behind. She squeezed my hand and said, I'm sorry about him. I'm not angry, Aubrey. She loved you. I know she loved you. She looked tired. She always looked tired. She always looked tired. I hugged her and I meant it. The next 6 months were not fun. Gerald didn't speak to me directly, but he said things to other people that got back to me. That I had manipulated a sick old woman. That I had taken advantage of my position in the house. That it wasn't right. That the house should stay in the immediate family. That I wasn't even, and here's where it got ugly. That I wasn't even really family, not in the same way, since my mother was gone and I had no real claim. I want you to sit with that for a second. The woman who raised me from 9 years old, who came to every school play, who taught me to drive, who called me her granddaughter to everyone she knew for 22 years, and her own son was out there telling people I had no real claim. I didn't respond. I didn't call him. I didn't send a message. I took possession of the house, which was my legal right, and I started the process of deciding what to do with it. I wasn't ready to move back to Columbus, but I also wasn't ready to sell. It felt too soon. It felt like losing her twice. I paid the property taxes. I paid for a minor roof repair. I drove up once a month to check on it. I kept her chair in the living room exactly where it was. Preston, my cousin, Gerald's son, texted me once in this period. He said, "That house is my dad's legacy, and you know it. I hope you're proud of yourself." I didn't respond to that either. What I did was go to therapy, which I mention because I think it's important to say that I was not handling this alone, and I was not handling it perfectly. I was sad and angry, and sometimes I wondered if I had done something wrong just by accepting what my grandmother wanted to give me. My therapist, who is brilliant, helped me understand that grieving the relationship with my uncle and being legally and morally in the right were not mutually exclusive. I could hold both things at once. I held both things for 6 months. Then came the party. Gerald and Marlene's 30th wedding anniversary. He was throwing a big dinner, renting out a private room at a nice restaurant downtown. 40 guests, the whole production. I found out about it through Sylvie, who called to tell me I was invited and to please come, that she thought it would be good for everyone. I almost said no. I want to be honest about that. My first instinct was to say no, absolutely not. I am not going to walk into a room full of people where half of them probably think I'm a villain and smile my way through a dinner. But then I thought about Grandma June. I thought about what she would have wanted, which was not for her family to fall apart completely. And I thought about the fact that Sylvie had been kind to me, and I didn't want to make her position harder than it already was. And I thought about the envelope. Let me explain the envelope. About a month before the anniversary dinner, Beverly called me. She said that when she'd been finalizing some of the estate paperwork, she'd found something in Grandma June's files. A letter, sealed, with my name on it, that had been sitting in Beverly's office in a folder since the year after my grandmother's stroke. It had been there all along. Beverly apologized for not finding it sooner. It had been misfiled. I drove to Beverly's office and I sat in the same chair I'd sat in when the will was read, and Beverly handed me an envelope with my name written on it in my grandmother's handwriting. I didn't open it there. I waited until I was in my car. I sat in the parking garage for 45 minutes reading it. I'm not going to read you every word, because some of it was just for me. But the relevant part, the part that matters to this story, was that Grandma June had included, along with the letter, a separate document, a signed, notarized statement, written in her own words, explaining exactly why she had left me the house. Her reasoning, her love, her absolute, clear-headed, uncoerced intention. She had anticipated with perfect accuracy that Gerald would question her mental state. She had anticipated that someone would suggest I had taken advantage of her, and she had, in her quiet, ironing the pillowcases way, simply prepared for it. She had documented everything. She had also written, near the end of the letter, "You've never needed anyone to fight your battles, but I wanted to fight this one for you anyway. Consider it my last gift." I sat in that parking garage and I cried for a long time. Then I drove home. Then I figured out what I was going to do. I went to the anniversary dinner. I wore a blue dress I'd bought specifically for the occasion. I got my hair done. I brought the envelope, the whole thing, the letter and the notarized statement, and the original signed copy Beverly had given me, in a small gift bag wrapped neatly with tissue paper, with a card on the outside that said "Congratulations on 30 years." Sylvie found me at the door and hugged me and looked relieved and a little nervous. She said, "I'm really glad you came." Gerald saw me from across the room and his expression went through several things in quick succession. He didn't come over. Marlene didn't come over either. I found my seat. I was at a table toward the side, not the main table, which I noticed and filed away. And I talked to Sylvie's husband and their kids and a couple of Gerald's old friends who didn't know the situation and were perfectly pleasant. Dinner came and went. The speeches started. Gerald stood up and talked about 30 years of marriage and family and legacy. He used that word several times, legacy, and how much it meant to have everyone he loved in the room. I watched him say the word family, and I thought about what he'd been saying about me for 6 months, and I kept my face very calm. Then Preston, my cousin, who is now 37 years old and should know better, tapped his glass and stood up and said he wanted to add something. He looked directly at me when he said it. "Family is about more than just showing up when it's convenient," he said. "It's about what you do when things get hard. It's about honoring what your family built." He was still looking at me. Around the table, a few people shifted uncomfortably. Sylvie looked at her plate. I picked up my water glass and took a slow sip. Gerald seemed to take this as an opening. He said, and I want to be very precise here because I've replayed it many times. He said, some people think family is something you can just take from. Like there's no responsibility attached. Like you can disappear for years and then show up and take what isn't yours. He was talking about me. In a room with 40 people. At his anniversary dinner, someone at my table made a small, uncomfortable sound. Marlene touched Gerald's arm like she was maybe trying to slow him down, but not very hard. I set down my water glass. I said, I'm sorry, are you talking to me? The room got quiet in that particular way. Rooms do when something is about to happen. Gerald said, if the shoe fits? I nodded slowly. I reached under my chair for the gift bag I'd brought. I set it on the table. I said, I actually brought you both something. Gerald looked at the bag. Marlene looked at the bag. Gerald said with genuine contempt, we don't need anything from you. I said, I know, but I think you might want to read this one. I slid the bag toward Preston, since he was closer. He opened it, looked at the tissue paper, looked at me, then took out the envelope and looked at the card. He opened the card. He read it. I had written, inside, simply, Gran wrote this herself, 18 months before she died. Beverly has the original on file. Happy anniversary. He handed it to Gerald. Gerald opened the envelope. He started reading. I watched his face. The room was still very quiet. Gerald read for what felt like a long time. Marlene leaned over to read with him. I saw the moment it landed, whatever specific paragraph it was, because Gerald's jaw tightened, and he looked up at me with an expression I can't quite name. I said, she knew Gerald. She knew exactly what she was doing, and she knew exactly what you would say afterward. And she documented all of it because she wanted to make sure I wouldn't have to defend myself to anyone. She did that for me, because that's who she was. The room was so quiet I could hear the kitchen noise from the other side of the door. I stood up. I smoothed my dress. I'm going to head out, I said. Congratulations on 30 years. I mean that. I picked up my purse. I hugged Sylvie on the way out, quickly, and she squeezed my arm, and I could see she was trying not to cry. I walked out of that restaurant in my blue dress, and I sat in my car in the parking lot, and I texted my best friend a single message. I think it went okay. She called me immediately. I talked to her for an hour sitting in that parking lot. Gerald called me 3 days later. I let it go to voicemail. He called again the following day, and the day after. When I finally listened to the voicemails, they weren't what I expected. No more accusations. No more, she wasn't in her right mind. Just Gerald, sounding older than I'd ever heard him sound, saying he wanted to talk, that he'd read the whole document, that he didn't know his mother had written it, that he had some things he wanted to say to me. I called him back eventually. It was a long conversation, and I'm not going to pretend it resolved everything, because it didn't. Some things don't get resolved. Some things you just carry differently over time. But he apologized for what he said at the dinner. He apologized for what he'd been saying to other people. He said he'd been grieving, and he'd handled it badly, and he knew that wasn't an excuse. I told him I appreciated that. I meant it. I moved into Grandma June's house 4 months ago. I work remotely, so the move wasn't complicated. Mostly logistics, mostly timing. I have her chair in the living room exactly where it always was. I have her mug in the cabinet. I haven't changed the kitchen. I sleep in the room at the end of the hall. My old room. The one she made space for when I was 9 years old. I lie in bed sometimes and I can almost smell the coffee and whatever she was baking. And I think about how she said dinner's at 6. Don't be late, like it was the most ordinary thing in the world. She gave me a foundation. That's the word she used. And she was right that I needed one. And she was right that she wanted to give it to me. And she was right that nobody was going to take it. She was right about most things. I still call on Sunday mornings at 9 o'clock sometimes, habit I think, or maybe something else. Obviously she doesn't pick up. But I sit in the kitchen with my coffee and I think about what I'd tell her, and I think she'd like knowing I'm here. In her house, taking care of it, coming home to it every night. She used to say, "You've always been fine." I think about that a lot. I'm starting to believe it. I've thought a lot about why Gerald said what he said at that dinner. Not to excuse it, I'm past needing to excuse it, but to actually understand it. Because I think when people act the way he did, the way Preston did, there's usually something underneath it that has nothing to do with you. Gerald had spent years building a story in his head about what he deserved, what his mother owed him, what was rightfully his. And when that story got interrupted, when reality turned out to be different from the version he'd been living in, he didn't know how to reckon with it, so he pointed at me instead. That's not wisdom I was born with. That's something I had to work for, in therapy, in quiet evenings alone in this house, in a lot of Sunday mornings sitting with my coffee and no one to call. What I keep coming back to is my grandmother's foresight. She knew. She sat down and she wrote that letter and had it notarized and left it with Beverly because she understood, with clear eyes, exactly how people behave when they feel threatened by loss. She didn't do it out of bitterness. She did it out of love. For me, specifically, because she knew I would need it. She knew I wouldn't fight, that I'd go quiet, that I'd need something to speak for me when I couldn't speak for myself. That kind of love is not passive. That's an act of intelligence and will. She planned for my dignity the way other people plan for their retirement. I find that extraordinary, the more I think about it. And I think about what it cost her to raise me, not financially, though there was that too, but emotionally, practically, in all the small daily ways that nobody sees or counts. She just did it. She made space. She showed up. She built a life around a child who wasn't her obligation but who she chose anyway. That kind of sustained, unglamorous commitment over 22 years. That's what integrity actually looks like. Not a grand gesture, just choosing, every day, to do the right thing. What I took from all of it, from the hardest parts, the months of silence, the things Gerald said that I can't fully unhear, is that your actions accumulate. The way you treat people when there's nothing in it for you. When no one is watching, when it's inconvenient, that accumulates into something. It becomes a record. Grandma June's record was so clear and so consistent that she could write a single letter and it could walk into a room 30 months after her death and silence everyone in it. I want to live like that. I want to make choices I'd be willing to document. I want the way I treat people to be something I could defend in writing, with my name on it, notarized. Gerald called again last week. We're not close, and I don't know if we ever will be. But we talk. That's something. Sylvie and I have dinner once a month now, which is more than we ever managed before any of this happened. Preston hasn't reached out again, and I've made my peace with that. The chair is still in the living room. Right where it always was. I think that's what Grandma June would want most. Not the justice of it. Not even the outcome. Just to know that someone is taking care of her house and her chair and showing up for Sunday mornings, even when Sunday mornings are quiet now. I'm still here. I'm taking care of it. That's enough.